with me a lot said, you know, this is an easy trip this morning, 30 minutes down I-75. Because I think Karen's the only other statewide candidate here. She was somewhere. This is a big state, so we enjoy coming down to Cartersville. We share the same industry. We understand how important manufacturing is. We share the same interstate, but I noticed coming in here, it looks like y'all need some carpet on the floor. So if you don't know where to, you know, call, you should certainly get carpet on the floor. So,
We would appreciate.
May I just add that Bruce mentioned donations, and we'll
Give us a good price.
this is the first time I get a chance to recognize, you know, when families are involved in politics, you know, they sort of signed on for better or for worse, no matter what. But I've got my business partner and two of his two sons here, Brian Peters, who lives in Cartersville in Bartow County. They really didn't sign on to these things or whatever, but he certainly has been very good about being very patient with me on my political ambitions. And great to be in Cartersville, great to be in a manufacturing community, and the main reason probably I'm running for governor is that I want to help restore Georgia back to our proper place as the most successful, powerful economy in the South. Because we have fallen on very hard times in this state over the last 12 to 15 years. Where we used to lead the South in almost every economic category, we now trail the South and the country in almost every economic category. And we're also going to answer a question in this election in the Republican primary. Is the Georgia Republican Party truly a party of limited government, less spending, less taxes, less regulations, and open and transparent government, or are we not? We believe in that in Dalton. Over the last 7 years since I've been mayor, we've cut property taxes 6 straight years, now by a total of almost 28%. Cut general fund spending. We have the lowest sales tax in Georgia, probably in the South. We've cut most business license fees in half and reduced many regulations. In 2012, the city of Dalton ranked 9th in America in fastest growing incomes, because limited government works. You need to understand about my 5-way test when I'm talking about limited government. I'm not just talking about an ideology. What limited government means is this. A country only has so much air in it. And the more air government takes, the less air the private sector has, which means the less freedom you have. And let's contrast what we've done in Dalton under limited government with what Nathan Deal has done as governor of the state of Georgia. First of all, he's increased the size and scope of state government, mostly at the expense of local governments. And I think Commissioner Taylor knows exactly what I'm talking about with some of Nathan Deal's policies with that. He's increased spending dramatically. He's increased spending from about $17.4 billion his first year in office. This year's proposed budget is almost $21 billion. And I find it interesting, in the same week that Nathan Deal announces his budget with another $1 billion spending increase, that the governor, Republican governor of Wisconsin, announced a $1 billion tax decrease because he says it's the state's people, it's the state's citizens' money. Obviously, we don't have the right Republican governor when our guys increase in spending while other Republican governors are cutting taxes. He's raised taxes multiple ways. I'll concentrate on one at the moment that's driving most of our state revenue increases, which is the new way we tax automobiles in Georgia. And we're already the most expensive state to own and operate a vehicle in America. A lot of people don't realize that when I say that. Not California, not New Jersey, not New York. Georgia is the most expensive state to own and operate a vehicle in, driven by our high taxes and fees. It's interesting that the state just to the north of us, Tennessee, has no state income tax. The state just to the south of us, Florida, has no state income tax. And their taxes and fees on automobiles are half ours. Well, what that tax has done for the state legislature and the governor, who's increasing spending dramatically, as we sit here, is it's driven almost most of the revenue increases in the first 6 months of the 2014 fiscal year. We've increased revenues by $442 million. And also remember that our governor says we've increased revenues without increasing taxes. He's not telling the truth. The TEVT tax, the new way we tax automobiles, has driven 46% of that increase, $204 million. A dramatic tax increase in Georgia, who's already trailing the South in economic activity. He's increased regulations. And why wouldn't he increase regulations? He's an attorney. He's endorsed by the Georgia trial attorneys. They raised $400,000 for his campaign. Why would he be increasing regulations? Somebody mentioned the EPA. Look what our Georgia EPD's done, which is our version of the EPA. And lastly, he's decreased transparency. You cannot have limited government if you don't have transparent government because you don't know what they're doing. I'll go back to another tax, the bed tax, the hospital bed tax. It was passed by Governor Perdue in the legislature a little over 3 years ago to plug a temporary hole in Medicaid. And at least that legislature voted on that tax. What Governor Deal has done, I guess he's learned this trick after 18 years in Washington, D.C., is he convinced the legislature, hey, you're limited government conservatives. I know you are because you go out and campaign that way. You may not govern that way, just like me. But we got to keep this charade up that we're limited government conservatives. So you don't need to be voting on a tax increase. Just vote to move it to the Department of Community Health. Give them the authority to levy that tax. I appoint that board. That's exactly what they did. The Department of Community Health immediately levied that tax at 1.45% of hospital revenues, which brings in about $240 million a year. Worse than that, they have the ability to raise that tax to 6% of hospital revenues, and hospitals aren't paying that tax. Small businesses, individual payers, insurance companies, who also pass it on to their ratepayers, that's who's paying that tax. Well, that tax can go now to $1 billion a year, and you will never see it. And it's instructive that Nathan Deal said they're using the nursing home bed tax as the precedent of doing that. 2003, the state legislature, I think Democrats for the most part back then, Republican government, passed that authority to tax nursing home beds to the Department of Community Health. At that point, they levied the tax at $7.35 per bed per day, and now 10 years later, that tax has gone to $17.10 per bed per day, the maximum, and you never saw your legislator vote on that tax. It's increased 28% since Nathan Deal's been governor. So don't tell me he's not increasing taxes. Now, what has that type government done for Georgia? Well, we're ranked 4th in America in the highest percentage of long-term unemployed, more than twice our surrounding state. We rank 5th in poverty. And what makes that really onerous is the states above us are far smaller than us. Mississippi with 2.9 million people. New Mexico with 1.9 million people. When you have 20% poverty rate in a state of 10 million people, that's a disaster. And that's continuing to grow. We've gone from 15th to 6th in food stamp recipients, adding over 40,000 in the last year alone. And most of the jobs we're creating in Georgia, this last year they said we created 91,000 jobs. Over half of those were what we call business services, which is driven by temporary employment agencies in leisure and hospitality. I have nothing against any job, but those jobs are minimum wage and part-time jobs with no health care benefits, and that's one reason why our Medicaid population is growing dramatically. We can do better than this. This state ranked #1 in per capita income growth from the 1970s through the 1990s. And during that time, if you look back over a little over 20 years when you're talking about limited government, in Georgia in 1991, I think it was, we had about 6 million people in this state. We had a general fund budget of about $6 billion. We were spending about $1,000 per Georgian through our general fund budget. Now, a little over 20 years later, we now have 10 million people in the state of Georgia, and the governor's just proposed a $21 billion general fund budget, which means we're going to spend an average of $2,100 per person in the state of Georgia. Back when we were spending $1,000, we led the nation in per capita income growth. Now that we're spending $2,100, we're trailing the nation in per capita income growth and getting poorer every year. Because limited government works. When you have an overarching federal government, state government, local governments, it makes people poor and it drives private enterprise out of the system, particularly small businesses. And small businesses create 65% of the net new jobs in America. We need to cut the Georgia income tax immediately from 6% to 4%.
Amen.
That'll cost about $2.3 billion in state revenues. Nathan Deal could have done that when he took office, still increased spending by $1.2 billion, and been able to do that without cutting spending. He chose not to. The next thing we need to do is we need to allow 100% expensing of capital purchases in the first year for all businesses. Because capital-intensive businesses produce the best jobs with the best benefits. If we'll do those two things, and you link that with Georgia's wonderful hard assets, best ports in America, the best airport in the world, the best interstate system in the South, the best railroad network in the South, competitive utilities, a great university system, we will become a manufacturing powerhouse instead of once again trailing the South in manufacturing employment. We've lost more manufacturing jobs per capita than any other state in the South with these unbelievable assets to build them. And manufacturing jobs at the moment are the best jobs that most Georgians are trained to be able to do or well educated enough to be able to do. Paying $13, $14, $15 an hour with health care benefits. And we've got to improve our education system in Georgia. We've talked about it for years. We've doubled real spending on it for years. And what are the results? I think we've gone from 48th in high school graduation rates to 47th. You can trace the decline of public education in this state and in this country. First of all, with the centralization of all the power and authority into state houses and governors' offices, and then in Washington, D.C. In 1900, only 10% of 18-year-olds in this country had a high school diploma. By 1970, 80% of 18-year-olds had a high school diploma, with almost total local control during that time. When we started allowing the states to take more and more of the control and the authority, and then in 1979, when Jimmy Carter started the Federal Department of Education, the federal government started taking more and more control of local education. By 2000, only 74% of 18-year-olds had a high school diploma. Centralized control does not work in anything. That's why the Soviet Union fell apart. I'm against Common Core. First of all, if you look at the curriculum, it's very poorly done. But even more important, it's centralized control is what that's about. So we do not need Common Core. I completely oppose that. The last part of this is this. We're in a democratic republic. And you cannot operate or have a successful democratic republic if you don't trust your elected officials. And the biggest deficit I think we have in this country is not the trade deficit. It's not the budget deficit. It's the trust deficit of our federal, state, and local officials. It's instructive in a state, and somebody brought this up about open meetings. Our state legislature and our governor thinks it's important for city councils that I'm on, county commissions that Steve's on, local school boards. We have to have open meetings and open records. They've exempted themselves from that. And they spend way more money than we do. We need to have the same open meetings and open records laws at the state level as we have at the local level. That's extremely important. The last part of that is this, our Ethics Commission. Now, they passed an ethics law last year. It was very watered down, and the only reason they did it because I think 86% of Republicans said they wanted a comprehensive ethics reform. 77% of Democrats said they wanted comprehensive ethics reform. So they passed something last year. Wasn't much, but at least they passed something. They turned it over to an ethics commission as of January 1 of this year, who has to write the regulations and the rules and then enforce it. An ethics commission has now been completely destroyed and blown up by Nathan Deal. He appoints 3 members of that. He's totally removed a lot of the employees. They can't administer anything at the moment. The Ethics Commission needs to be completely separate from the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the House with their own budget and their own way of appointing those members, not the very people they're supposed to be enforcing the ethics regulations with who are doing the appointing. That is critical for the state of Georgia if we're going to restore trust in a state that ranks 50th by most corruption polls in America. Once again, not Louisiana, not New Jersey, Georgia ranks 50th in most of the corruption rankings in America. This state is a wonderful state. We didn't lead the nation in per capita income growth from the 1970s to 1990s because we were lucky. God has blessed us with wonderful assets. We will get back to what we used to be with limited government principles. Less spending, less taxes, less regulations, and open and transparent government. We will restore Georgia once again to our name of the Empire State of the South. Thomas Jefferson said a long time ago, this country's going to need a revolution every 20 years. Well, we're about 250 years overdue. We need a revolution in Georgia on May 20th in the Republican primary by electing the first true lone government conservative Republican, because we haven't had one yet, is governor. Thank y'all. If you'll go to my website, davidforgeorgia.com, we have a sign-up sheet back here. Those of you that would like to join this mission of restoring Georgia back to our proper place as the most powerful, successful economy in the South, we'd love to have your help. Several of you asked about yard signs. Blake, who is with our campaign back there, if you'll give him your name, we'll make sure you get the yard signs. Thank y'all for having me. I think we've got a few minutes. Questions?
A couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to find out if you would like to see the state that rein in the federal government.
Without a doubt. The only way I can tell you, we tried to rein in the federal government through Congress with whoever's up there, Republican or Democrat. Understand from 2000 to 2006, we had a Republican White House, a Republican House of Representatives, a Republican Senate, and they completely blew the budget up. Obviously, that's not working. The states need to assume their sovereign rights. They need to control the federal government the way this country was set up to begin with. Right now, the states are blowing up the federal government themselves by asking for more and more goodies.
Well, I'm very proud to say that the Senate Rules Committee voted on having a convention of states where the states will propose amendments to the Constitution. They will set the rules. They will set the votes. All we need is 34 states to join us. We'd like to see Georgia to be first. And it is now going to the full Senate for a vote and then on to the House. And that way, the states will take back the controls that are in our Constitution that they were supposed to have all along. Thank you.
Yep.
We know that having transparent, ethical elected officials is key to being able to trust what happens in our state, building good relationships. And you mentioned something about the Ethics Commission. What would you say is your plan to restructure it?
First of all, I think it needs to be the legislature's plan, not the governor's plan as far as that's concerned. Josh McCoon, a senator, has come up with an interesting proposal, which he really copied from another senator, I think, from a few years ago, where possibly the state Supreme Court will be involved in that in some form or fashion. It's, or maybe even the Attorney General's office in some form or fashion. But I know it needs to be completely separated from the people they're supposed to be regulating.
Are you going to be here?
I will, I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank y'all.
We got 2 more speakers.